Alrighty, so today we're going to be in the book of Genesis, which is actually like one of my favorite books just because it's most entertaining. There's so much going on in it. And we're going to be talking about betrayal today, which is something we experience a lot of. At least, well, maybe not all of us, but I've experienced it quite often. Or at least people not staying true to their word. In the life connection part, it says everyone has experienced hurt from someone close to them. You can't be betrayed by someone you don't trust. We don't need to feel defeated, though, even when we are betrayed. Even when that betrayal carries great consequences for our families, jobs, or well-being. Fortunately, God never betrays us. Through his word, we can see how betrayal affected one man. By looking at the life of Joseph, we can identify steps that contribute to betrayal and perhaps avoid the consequences. I don't really know if we can avoid betrayal, but we can definitely not give people as much ammo, I guess.
I don't think you can avoid anybody betraying you, but you can avoid you betraying somebody else.
Yeah. And that's what, as we'll see inside of this, resentment just grew with his brothers and stuff like that. And I don't know if he just had a blind eye to it or what it was, but at least in my experience, I feel like I pretty often can tell when starting to aggravate a certain group or certain people pretty well. And I don't know, but sometimes you just never know. Sometimes it comes out of nowhere. So it's just part of life, I guess. So it says that the book of Genesis provides the account of God's people from the time of his promise to Abraham until the deaths of Jacob and Joseph, a grandson and a great-grandson respectively. In the account, God showed how he worked in the lives of Abraham and extended family to guide them in keeping his plan for his people. He worked in the life of Jacob's son, Joseph, who played a critical role in carrying out God's plan. All right, so before we get too much more into this, I'll give us a word of prayer. I don't know why I like reading the first part first, but well, whatever. Dear Lord, thank you for allowing us all to be together today, and for those who aren't here, please keep them safe, and hopefully there's not too much of an issue of why they're not here. I would like for you to show us how we can stop betrayal, or how we can negate some betrayal in our lives, and how when we do inevitably become betrayed, that we can learn to deal with it and not fight fire with fire, and not be bitter over the things that happen to us, even though it is quite hard in my experience. Please help this message touch us and give us something to think about for this next week, and guide us in your path to be closer to you. And in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I don't want to touch on that. All right, so our first one is going to be Genesis 37, 1 through 5, verses 1 through 5. I'll go ahead and read off, and it says, Jacob lived in a land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. These are the family records of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. He brought a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons, because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age. He made a long-sleeved robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. Then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. So it says, to summarize it, blind to his father's favoritism, Jacob added fuel to the fire by giving Joseph a long-sleeved robe. This custom-made coat seemed to push the brothers over the edge. While Joseph's predicament was mostly his father's fault, it is important to notice the sovereign will of God that played out in the story. While God can't be blamed for evil, he does allow his children to walk through dark valleys for a purpose. So I definitely agree with the walking through dark valleys part. I'm a firm believer that you don't have some hardship and you don't have bad things in your life, then the good things won't be as good. You can't enjoy them as much if you hadn't had a little bit of struggle for them. I mean, we don't want to have a lot of struggle, but sometimes that comes too. It says it gave them a long-sleeved robe, which, since they were shepherds and more or less laborers, that kind of set him really apart from the rest of his brothers. Like, you can't, if he wore that long-sleeved robe out there to go and tend to the sheep, you'd have been restricted, you'd have tore it up, and it would have just gotten destroyed really quickly. So that long-sleeve robe almost pretty much put him above the rest of his family in a certain light, I guess. So it's easy to see how he had, I don't know if I'm going to read it later in here or if I skipped it already, but he had 12 kids. Jacob had 12 kids, and Joseph was the oldest one. So that's a lot of brothers to become resentful for you. And it said that he was the last born, so all of them are older. If you know anything about living with older siblings, it's usually a lot of beating up going on. So ultimately, the story of Joseph is about God using the mundane, everyday events of our lives to bring about his grand purpose. Joseph's story helps us see how we can trust the Lord to help us through our everyday family problems. God wants to use it, all of it, to bring glory to his name. I know a lot of the times, a lot of people will start coming back to church or will start getting more into religion or something like that after some big thing happens to them. Maybe it's a death in the family or heartbreak, or what got me to start doing everything again is, almost dying. So, it's just part of the plan. And I think that we do have some autonomousness, like we have our own free will. So not everything is set in stone, but he pretty much knows what's going to happen. So in verse 1, it says, Jacob lived in a land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. Says, we sometimes experience pitfalls we did not cause. Like Joseph, we can carry on with our lives, oblivious to the betrayal boiling up around us. Joseph didn't appear to have a clue regarding the betrayal awaiting him at the hands of his brothers. Neither did his father Jacob, for that matter. Jacob had been able to put his struggles with his own brother Esau behind him. Afterward, the Lord told Jacob to move back to his home in Bethel and renew a fresh walk with him. Bethel was located in the land of Canaan, otherwise known to God's people, who would come along later as the promised land of Israel. I don't know, is Canaan up on here anywhere? Let's see, where is that? There's Canaan. Is it the same thing? Probably not. Yeah, I don't see it on there, maybe. So I'm not really sure where that was. It's probably something I might have looked into, but anyways. So verse 2, it says, these are the family records of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended the sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and he had brought a bad report about them to their father. So although trouble no longer lingered in the shadows of Jacob's past, it loomed larger every day in the presence of his dysfunctional family. Oh man, that hits home. Joseph turned out to be the victim of the family's pain that emanated from the dysfunction. The harmful relationship within the family could be traced back to Jacob's favoring of one of his two wives, Rachel, which damaged his relationship with his other wife, Leah. Jealousy gradually consumed both wives with the birth of their children. Along with Rachel and Leah, Jacob had children with two concubines, Bilhah, which was Rachel's maid, and Zilpah, which was Leah's maid. Altogether, Jacob's wives and concubines gave him 12 sons. Joseph grew up in a dysfunctional family where jealousy had been simmering for some time. In that setting, sibling rivalries had the perfect opportunity to emerge. Left unresolved, the rivalries would have devastating results. By the time Joseph reached an age of 17, jealousy within the family had given birth to hatred and nourished by resentment. This time, the jealousy didn't seem to come directly from the wives or concubines. Instead, it emanated from the way of Jacob's favoring Joseph over his other sons. So yeah, I imagine that house had to have been pretty interesting at dinner time. You got basically, I mean, it's not 4 wives, but more or less 4 wives, 12 kids. And Jacob had been through some stuff in his past too, so I'm sure that story time around the table got pretty interesting at times, to say the least. But and I think depending on if you've grown up in a larger family or whatever, it's very relatable to understand some of that. So in verse 3, it says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons, because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age. He made a long-sleeved robe for him." Jacob did not restrain himself from showing favoritism towards Joseph, who had been born at the time in Jacob's life when his affection for his young son would have been difficult to resist. Jacob's love for Joseph made the tense relationship between him and his brothers even worse when Jacob presented his favorite son with a long-sleeved robe. In those days, such a robe of bright colors would have covered Joseph to his wrists and his ankles. By contrast, men working in the fields would not have worn such a cumbersome garment. It would have been restricted their arms and legs as they worked. Without a doubt, the robe set Joseph apart as Jacob's favorite son. Consequently, it also signaled Joseph's superior position over the other sons. So I wonder what was going through his mind at that time, because he had to have known that that was going to create some issues. And I don't know if maybe I should have reread Genesis, so I got a little bit more context in there. But to me, that just seems like you're asking for problems. I mean, I guess if he wanted him to take over everything, it would have been a problem they would have had to deal with eventually, but...
I imagine the other brothers getting pretty upset, because back in those times, that's when it's like common for the oldest to take over and stuff like that, and then
the firstborn,
youngest to end up being the favored is
different. Yeah, and even today, in times, it's usually the firstborn who gets first pick or something like that. But that I'm sure that had to have been very, very difficult, and definitely would have created harbored some negative feelings. So in verses 4 and 5 it says, "When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. Then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more." Perhaps without knowing it, Joseph continued to set up for his betrayal by his brothers. They could see with their own eyes how Jacob adored Joseph. Nothing they could ever do for Jacob would render the same kind of affection for any of them, and they knew it. Thus, their jealousy continued to heat up inside them until it boiled over into hate. Their intense hatred showed itself in their unwillingness to be civil to him. The common courtesy of speaking peacefully to Joseph had been altogether lost on his brothers. Hatred for him had absolutely consumed them and disabled them from being courteous. To make matters worse, Joseph had an intriguing dream. He shared the details of his dream with his brothers. What he shared left them with the impression that he would rule over them someday. Their hatred for Joseph grew even more intense and set the stage for betrayal. So I think a good little piece in there that we could take that it doesn't talk about is they just kept letting their jealousy boil over. They kept focusing on the same thing, and maybe if there's some new stuff in between there too, but they kept focusing on the same things and just create a lot of negative resentment. I'm a big believer in forgive but never forget. So I try not to hold on to when people do things that I don't like. I try not to hold on to that. I might not give them the same trust or give them the same space that I used to give them, but just focusing on that same issue over and over, it does nothing for you, just stresses you out,
Mhm.
So sometimes it's very, very hard to look the other way on that. And sometimes I like to tell myself I'm looking the other way, and then something will happen with them, and
It kind of sucks for Joseph because it's not like he asked for his father's favoritism.
right.
He didn't ask to be favored. He didn't ask to be hated by his brothers. He didn't ask for his dad to have basically 4 wives.
Yeah, he's just thrown right into it, and there's nothing, even if he was conscious of his brothers being upset about all these things, there's only so much he can do, especially as Jacob was the leader of the household, and, even if Joseph wanted to pass on the robes or something like that, that wouldn't really been, I don't think that would have really been okay back then, because there's a reason that the head of the household picks the next one to, carry on his will or whatever. So yeah, being thrust into it and having no say in the matter, I'm sure that had to stress Joseph out too. I can't imagine that he didn't realize what was going on. He may not have realized it to the extent of, as we'll see, they're gonna do something to him. He might not have realized that, but he had to have known something was coming. So now we're on Genesis 37, verses 19 through 24. Do one of you guys want to read it, or should I just read it again? All right. They said to one another, "Oh, look, here comes the dream expert. So now, come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say a vicious animal ate him. Then we'll see what he becomes of in his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from them. He said, "Let's not take his life." Reuben also said to them, "Don't shed blood. Throw him into the pit in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him," intending to rescue him from them and return him to his father. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off Joseph's robe, the robe of many colors that he had on. Then they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty without water. So I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit again, but back in those times, they would have dug these big cisterns or pits or whatever, because they're pretty much in the desert, and then they would fill up with rainwater, and that's what they would use to to give their sheep something to drink as they're roaming around the lands. And then a lot of the times these would dry up if they hadn't had a good rain, or they'd been pulling from it too much, or I don't know if they would have used like clay or something around it to keep the water in there. I don't know if it'd just eventually seep away. Yeah, so I was wondering when I first read that, I was like, why is there just pits? Is this for hunting or something? Is the animal supposed to fall in there? But it says it later on in here, but I like to jump ahead. So, it says right here. In the wilderness, shepherds would dig deep pits or cisterns into the ground so they would collect water. The pits dried up over time, leaving gaping holes that could be dangerous. If a shepherd fell into one of them, he would not be able to get out on his own. What is really happening here? Joseph's brothers had bitterness and hatred toward him stored up inside, and those hard feelings ultimately produced homicidal action. And that's one of the things with if you murder someone and they're trying to determine in court, the premeditation on it, the thinking of things over and over, the letting that anger build up until you finally do something, that is seen as worse than if it was just a crime of passion or something like that. And like I said earlier, it's true. If you just keep letting that bitterness and hatred boil up inside you, then it has nowhere to go but for you to do something dumb or say something dumb or somewhere in between. So, envy poisons, and we can see that clearly in Joseph's toxic brothers. We are wise to check our own hearts. It's convicting exercise to pause and consider the people we are tempted to envy in our current season of life. As important as it is to consider if envy resides in our hearts, it's also wise to consider if we have caused envy in the hearts of others. If the Lord had blessed you in some obvious way, a good chance exists that others are tempted to envy you and even resent you for it. The struggle with envy is real for all of us. At some point, we may cave to this temptation and secretly resent God for giving others what we want for ourselves. To guard against this, we must put on the mind of Christ. So, envy comes for all of us, I'm sure. I know I get envious of stuff sometimes, and I try to push it back, but sometimes it's hard. And then I'm one of those people, I'm single, I don't have any kids, I don't got anything to spend my money on but myself. So anytime I want something, I usually buy it. And then my buddies kind of get envious of me sometimes and I don't think they really resent me, but they crack resentful jokes. And not gonna happen. I mean, I'm very giving and with my friends, and what's mine is yours, basically. But it definitely can cause some struggles, especially when you try to do something nice for yourself, and other people don't just see it as trying to maybe some mental health help or something like that. But so that's something to be conscious of. Even little things in our lives that we get, other people can be envious of. And even if we had to struggle a lot to get that certain thing, other people don't always see that and can cause some envy. and we don't see all the struggles other people go through. Like on Facebook, people post their brand new cars and whatnot, and you're like, how the heck did you get a charger? I was like, you're younger than me. What's going on here? But, it happens. Everyone goes through their own paths. So in verses 19 and 20,
Thank you.
oh, bless you. I thought that was a cough. My bad. Animosity and jealousy can cause others to betray us. The combination of those two venomous poisons can turn ordinary, level-headed family members into dangerous, vindictive adversaries bent on betrayal. The hatred for Joseph consumed his brothers, simmering in their hearts. It boiled over when they heard him tell about the second dream. So what page are we on? 82, I think? That's fine. So we're in Genesis today, and talking about Joseph and Jacob, and his brothers are basically resenting him because he's the youngest one, and he's getting pretty much favoritism. And so they're about to throw him into a pit. That's where we are now.
The golden child?
Pretty much. So in this particular dream, Joseph reigned supreme over his father and mother as well as his brothers. Nobody in the family took the dream well. But then the scene shifted quickly to the wilderness where Joseph's brothers had taken the sheep in order to graze them in the open pasture. Jacob became concerned about them, so he sent Joseph to check. When the brothers saw Joseph from a distance, the venom manufactured by their envy and hostility took complete control over them. They called attention to his arrival by referring to him as the dream expert. Their sarcasm exposed their deep-seated disgust for him. The resentment turned the angry brothers into cold-hearted murderers. They began to provoke each other to work together to kill him. The Hebrew word that they used for kill signifies a brutal, violent execution. They began to prepare the lie they would spin to their father to explain Joseph's ugly death. Pay close attention to what they said about his dreams. They underscored their rage over the prospect that he would reign over them one day. By killing him, they would remove the possibility that his dreams would ever come true. So as we said earlier, he's the youngest one, and his dream came. He told everybody about his dream where he's going to be ruling over all of them. that's kind of asking for a little bit of resentment, I think. But
I mean,
I'm sure there's probably a better way to go about saying that, and maybe he did, and the Bible kind of paraphrases certain things for us. But
nowadays, though, when you're like, oh, I had a dream that this is gonna happen, people are like, oh, you had a dream. I had there was ugly night.
right, yeah, that's true.
Imagine how different this story would have gone if his brothers were just like, okay,
Like,
had
put him
a
in the
dream.
padded room.
Ooh.
Just send him off to the padded room or something.
Yeah, you're special.
So in verses 21 and 22, it says, strangely enough, Reuben had the presence of mind to put a stop to their plot. The oldest brother, Reuben, had taken the place of respect among his brothers that would make them take him seriously. Perhaps in that dynamic moment, he saw his brothers coming dangerously close to crossing the moral line of killing Joseph. Or maybe he found himself suddenly burdened by the weighty sense of responsibility for Joseph's life. Urging them to spare Joseph demonstrated his awareness that to shed Joseph's blood would be a treachery that take too far. So I think it's interesting that the oldest one is the one that pretty much is going to save him, because normally everything would go to the oldest brother, so you'd think that he would be the most resentful out of all of them, but apparently not. Then it says, Reuben knew Joseph would not be able to escape from the pit no matter how hard he tried. Secretly, Reuben anticipated returning to the pit to pull Joseph from it and return him to his father, safe and sound. Verses 23 and 24. Reuben persuaded his brothers to let Joseph live, but their rage couldn't prevent them from mistreating him. Apparently, they could see Joseph coming their way from a distance. They latched their eyes onto the robe of many colors that he wore. It brought poisonous pangs of jealousy to their hearts and enraged them. The Hebrew word for stripped conveyed violence toward him as they ripped the robe off his body. Joseph had no idea he would be treated so maliciously by his brothers. He trusted them to receive him with at least a small degree of civility. He didn't think for a moment that he would need to defend himself against their cruelty. Their hatred motivated them to betray his trust by stripping his robe from his body and throwing him into the pit. There, in the bottom of a dry hole in the ground, he suffered the agony of their betrayal. He had no water to quench his thirst and no way to make an escape. Worst of all, his brothers don't seem to care. With their treachery, Joseph's brothers had taken their initial step in betraying him. What drove them to take such vicious action against their brother? The answer to that question could be found in their hearts. They envied Joseph because their father had favored him over them, and had shown it by giving him a robe that signified this favor. Also, they resented Joseph's dreams that seemed to point to the day when they would be subject to him. That possibility threatened them and fed their animosity. Yeah, I can't, like I said earlier, I can't imagine that he just didn't know anything was going to come. But especially back in those days, your family is more important than a lot of the times family is seen in today's times. So I'm sure that he would have trusted them to take care of him and stuff like that. And so being at the bottom of that pit with nothing but yourself and time to think must have really brought to light how much pain that he was causing them and stuff like that. And I'm sure, had to have made him angry and upset and all the other stuff. But yeah, if he didn't realize it then, he definitely should have realized it now, once he's inside that bottom of that pit. So next we have Genesis 37, verses 26 and 27. Judah said to his brothers, "What do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come on, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. it's kind of changing up the story now, but at least he's still trying to save Joseph. Which I'm sure that if he had just went to that pit and pulled him back up and brought him home, then he might have been the next one in that pit. But if they're already harboring all these feelings and he goes and saves them and then tells the dad, which is just going to get him to probably treat the other kids worse.
So Reuben wanted to get him from the pit and then Judah wanted to sell him? Are these the... Because it was...
I believe...
So Reuben wanted to go and retrieve him from the pit.
Yes, and then...
Judah said to sell him.
Oh, okay, yeah. I totally skipped over that. Yeah. So I don't know where Judah was inside of this, like who he was born to, or anything like that. So I don't know where he was in this, but maybe the thought of actually they finally did something to him, and then they're thinking about the murder more and more. And one of the oldest brothers, which they look up to, had already, said, probably shouldn't do this. So maybe they started coming around to the idea of doing something else besides killing him, but still getting him out of the way so that way they could assume the throne, for lack of a better term.
I don't think they wanted to assume any sort of throne. They just didn't want him to have it.
It's probably true. Yeah. And it says that they looked up to Reuben. So it's possible that they probably didn't want the throne for themselves, but just didn't want the youngest one who's been treated with all this favoritism to have it. So that's a good point. So it says, though Joseph's story seemed to be coming to a screeching halt, God had other plans. The brothers made a last-minute decision to sell him into slavery. Their last-minute decision would impact their family and ultimately the entire nation of Israel in ways they couldn't imagine. Years later, Joseph would look those guilt-weary men in the eyes and say, "You planned evil against me. God planned it for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. It was a masterful plan from the Master. God is always up to something bigger than we can see. The author of the Bible is also the author of your story. Each chapter is packed with purpose." So that last part, I didn't really... The author of the Bible is also the author of your story. I mean, I think it's the subject of the Bible might be also the subject of our story. Because from my understanding, God didn't write, or Jesus or God didn't write any books inside of there. He just told other people what to write, which I guess you can call it a ghost author or whatever that the people are that write books for other people. But that part standed out to me a little bit. But that each chapter is packed with purpose. I've noticed that to be true. When I look back at other parts, it's hard to see it in the moment, but when I look back at parts of my life and the struggles that I had to go through, I can see how it changed me into a better person, or at least the person I am today. So Joseph experienced much suffering as he walked through life. With time, the bigger picture of God's plan would come into focus. When you're in those moments when life seems to have come to a stop, remember the life of Joseph. God's hand might not be obvious at the time, but he is at work. Life will deal us our share of disappointments, but the key is to keep moving forward and trusting in Christ. So whenever I'm having a bad time, I try to look at it and try to see what I could be learning from this moment. But oftentimes, I won't see it for weeks or months later. But I do find some bit of solace when I'm going through those hard times and knowing that, for one, it is only temporary, and for two, whatever it's teaching me or getting me through, it'll be better in a few months when I look back at it and I can laugh at the situation or whatever. So in verse 26, it says, "Even when others abandon or betray us, God, or this is what it says about it. Even when others abandon or betray us, God is at work on our behalf. Like Joseph, we may find ourselves feeling completely forsaken, deserted, and absolutely broken over the cruelty of others' betrayal. But often we can look back on those awful episodes and notice the invisible hand of God at work. We can see that He has held us up, protected us, and moved us along in keeping with His plan for us. After throwing Joseph into the pit, the brothers sat down and enjoyed a meal. While they ate, they observed a caravan coming along their way. That's okay. As the caravan approached, another brother, Judah, came up with the most profitable idea. He challenged his brothers not to cover up Joseph's blood. He may have feared that shedding Joseph's blood would invoke God's punishment. Even though Judah may have feared God, he seemed to have on the forefront of his mind the possibility of making money by keeping Joseph alive long enough to sell him. So that sounds like a great brother, but I mean, I guess it's better than being left in the pit or killed. You know.
That's Airways doing that.
Sometime? Okay. Then verse 27. Instead of leaving him to die, Judah advised his brothers to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites who were approaching them. The arrival of these traders brought to light another painful episode in which animosity tore apart the family of Joseph's great-grandfather. Abraham had Ishmael with Hagar, the maid of Sarah, his wife. Later on, Abraham and Sarah had Isaac. Sarah's hostility towards Hagar eventually drove her and Ishmael away. The traders obviously belonged to the family of Ishmael. Once more, Judah appealed to his brothers. This time he warned them against laying their hands on Joseph to harm him, pretending to take the moral high ground. Judah pointed out the indecency of the murder. The brothers couldn't defend themselves for killing Joseph by saying he attacked them. Quite the contrary, Joseph had done nothing to bring harm to them. Even if he had, the fact that they had the same father would not allow them to take his brother's life. So although Judah didn't want to kill Joseph, he had no issue with selling him. His appeal worked, and the brothers listened to Judah's pitch. They agreed to sell Joseph to the traders, so they dragged him out of the pit and handed him over to the Ishmaelites, who would in turn take Joseph to Egypt. There, they would sell Joseph to an Egyptian, and he would serve as a slave for the rest of his life. Taken off into a faraway land, he would be forgotten by his brothers, and his threatening dreams about reigning over them would never come to pass. Finally, they would be rid of the brother they hated. Taking at face value, the account of Joseph so far doesn't look very hopeful at all. His brothers had betrayed him, then abandoned him. They profited from selling him to traders. Joseph had lost everything that mattered to him: his robe, his identity, his family, his freedom. Actually, Joseph's hope never rested in what he had lost. His destiny rested in the hands of God alone, who intended for Joseph to go to Egypt. There, he could accomplish God's plan for his people. For that important reason, God protected Joseph from his brothers. He worked in Reuben's heart so that he would persuade his brothers not to kill Joseph. He guided Judah to provide Joseph with a way to escape so that he would be delivered from their cruel intention to snuff out his life. Furthermore, he used Joseph's awful ordeal to prepare him to shoulder the heavy loads of the responsibility awaiting for him in Egypt one day. God is at work in our lives, though we cannot always see his hand in the moment. When betrayed, we can find consolation and assurance that what has happened did not catch God off guard. He knows what happened to us. Furthermore, he does not waste the unspeakable pain of betrayal when we respond to him in faith. He agonizes with us, helps us press on, heals our broken hearts, and shapes us in keeping his plan. Therefore, we are wise when we turn to the Lord with certainty that he has not abandoned us, and to trust him with the assurance that he will guide us. Yeah, it's pretty hard to trust when we have difficult times. It's pretty hard to trust that it is going to get better. Because a lot of the times, especially if it's real bad, we can't see anything but the bad times. But I like to look back at past bad times, and every single time I've made it out of there. I made it out with some new bit of knowledge, some new bit of strength, something that made it maybe not worth it, but that made it all make a little bit more sense. So it can be very hard when we're in the moment to look forward and to just trust that it will get better, but a lot of the times there isn't much you can do in the moment anyways. So you can't go and immediately change it. So just have to trust that it will get better and that it's part of God's plan for you and part of the way he's going to make you into the stronger person that'll be able to help others in the future or help yourself better or somewhere in between. So it says that Joseph's story helps us see how we can trust the Lord to help us with our everyday problems. God wants to use our unique story, all of it, to bring glory to his name. Consider the following actions to help you deal with issues of jealousy and betrayal in your life. Share the burden. If you suffered from betrayal, don't try to go about it on your own. Seek out a Christian friend or mentor to talk about your hurt. Take a time out. Social media can fuel envy and jealousy. Take a break and use that time to listen to God. Ask him to reveal any jealousy or bitterness that you've been holding on to. Confess any ways that you were to blame and pray for healing. I definitely think that social media it's pretty negative a lot of the times. I actually have a timer on my phone that I can't go on Facebook or Instagram for more than 2 hours a day. And then my phone will just shut it off for me until the next day. And that is really helpful. Sometimes I just delete the app entirely, but the timers on there is great because especially when I'm just bored sitting around in the house and I'm just scrolling through, that doesn't help me none. And if it's locked, maybe I'll get up and do something around the house, do some chores around the house, or start working on this, or anything, but just scroll through and see all these. I mean, not all of it's negative, but a lot of it is negative, or a lot of it breeds those connotations of jealousy or whatever. Especially Instagram is really bad about it because it's basically just a place you show off. Everyone takes a picture of something usually worth taking a picture of. Some of them aren't very worthwhile, but
But they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we might not know the whole story.
that's very true.
And then obviously they could be depicting something that looks great in the moment, but we don't really know the whole story.
That's the big thing about social media. Everyone's life online isn't like their real life. It's always embellished in one way or another.
Yeah. Cherry pick the best parts out of it, and not very many people come and say, "Hey, man, today I was having a really bad day, and this was hard, this sucked, and but I'm making it through it."
I can say that I'm not gonna post a video of Charlie throwing a 3-hour-long temper tantrum, but I'll post all the pictures in the world of her smiling, being like, "Look at my precious, beautiful child."
Right. Right.
She didn't keep me up all night.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And that's a good thing to take in mind when we're looking at social media is that, there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes. And a lot of it is usually fairly negative. And a lot of the times with the people who post so much stuff that make it look like they have the best life or whatever, a lot of it's convincing themselves too.
I think so. So I think if you go on social media with the knowledge behind each person has a different story, something's going on in the background we don't know about, it's one way. But I can see how that could be a negative aspect. Social media can be very draining and negative.
Yeah, if you don't go into it thinking that, or if you are having a bad day and you go scrolling through social media and then see all the nice stuff in other people's lives, makes you just feel worse about yours.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it can be a very great place to connect with people, to even to see a lot of great things, but you just gotta take it with a grain of salt. So last thing it says is give freely. Instead of feeling jealous of what others have, spend time this week giving of yourself to others.
whether that be time, resources, or money. Giving your jealousy to God allows you to live your own life from a place of joy. And that's for sure. I feel better when I help people out. Usually it is just talking or resources or giving them a hand with something. But anytime that I've helped people out, even if they are ungrateful for it, it makes me feel better. You know, I love bringing a smile to someone's face, even if it is only for a moment. So
It's like that horrible world expression, kill them with kindness, because you said people who are ungrateful.
yeah,
Yeah, I like that one.
that's what I used to work in the casino as a card game dealer. And whenever we'd have grumpy guests, they'd always put me on the table because I would just kill them with kindness. And I would make them so upset, so much more upset. And I'm just like, oh yeah, how you doing today? And like just going at it. And they're like, will you just shut up? And I was like, no, I don't get paid to shut up.
Oh my gosh, I remember working in the pharmacy and doing that because you get the really grumpy old people who are, I don't want my medicine and it's your fault I don't have it. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm just a cashier.
All right. There's only so much we can do. But all right, so I guess I'll wrap us up with a prayer here, getting close to time. So dear Lord, thank you for being in our lives, and thank you for showing us all the paths that we have in life, that we aren't stuck on the same path of bitterness and jealousy and stuck in things that don't help us in the long run. Allow us to see when we make other people envious or jealous, and allow us to find a way to help them cope with that fact, to help them see that, you know, we all have our own struggles and we all are going through our own things, and eventually they will get through their struggles too. Help us not feel the emotions of jealousy and envy, and to just be happy for the other people who may have more than us or may be doing something that we wish we could do. Finally, I ask that you be with everyone who wasn't here today, and you bring them back to us next week. And help us go into the other room and hear the pastor's verses and find a way to connect that into our lives too. I ask all these things in your name. Amen.
What?